Hey there, I'm Tolor and this is the third video in my series How to Make It Happen in LOTV. First, I want to thank you all for the overwhelmingly positive feedback. I didn't expect my videos to be so well received, so as a thanks, there will be a second video this week. So, to this video. Mech is the most map-dependent playstyle in all of Starcraft 2. If you want to play Mech, you need to understand what are good features and what are bad features in maps, and where to take engagements. In this video, I will go over features that are good for macro Mech and then show it on examples. In the background, you will see a visualization of the feature I'm describing at that moment. First, about the most important feature for Mech ever, narrow paths and chokes. Most Mech units deal splash damage and or have a very high range, especially the siege tank. In narrow paths, the enemy can't build a good concave or split, and that means that narrow paths allow for maximum damage. I'll show you a video how much this affects tanks. In this video we have 45 to 2 marines with combat shield and stimpaks against 5 to 1 tanks. First we take this fight on an open field in which the opponent can build a really good concave and then stims and attack moves over the tanks. As you can see, the Marines win the fight easily. Now we change the terrain to a narrow choke and siege the tanks behind it, and the Marines just go through the choke, and as you see, all of the Marines die, and in the end, 3 tanks survive. Of course, this was a very extreme example. A Bioterran should never engage like this, but it shows the effect of chokes. In general, the narrower a map is, it is better for Mech. So to the next feature, few attack paths. This is also very important for Mech, because if there are only a couple of attack paths where the enemy can come from, the Mech player knows where he can attack, and that allows the Mech player to put his army in one place with no need to reposition, or not having to reposition as often. This is very important because Mech units are generally very slow. Short paths between bases. Again, Mech units are very slow, and if the bases are connected with very short paths, that means that you can take bases one by one without having to worry, for example, about the opponent disrupting the reinforcements. It also means that your reinforcements are at the base pretty fast. Small bases. Small bases simply mean that there's less space for drops, which is always a good point because drops are really strong against Mech. And also, Mech doesn't need as many production facilities anyways, so you don't have any disadvantage because of a small base. Now, these were the features that are really important for Mech. And now I'll go over a couple of features that are nice to have, but aren't as important. High ground expansions. High ground expansions mean that the opponent needs vision and he can't push up a cliff, so this means that an expansion that is on high ground is easier to defend, especially against low range units. In-base natural. An in-base natural means that there normally is a normal choke to defend 2 bases, which really weakens a number of all-ins. This is also a link to the features narrow paths and chokes and few attack paths, because there will only be one attack path to your natural, and this one is mostly a really narrow one. much space between own and opponent spaces. If there are long paths between your own and the opponent spaces, that makes splitting the map very easier. And in a split map scenario, the mech player will always win, because mech trade's much more efficient than anything else in the game. So, when both players have exactly the same resources, the mech army will stand at the end. Also, much space between own and opponent space means that he won't take a base on your side of the map. Xenaga watchtowers, especially on main attack paths. Xenaga watchtowers are really easy to clear with Hellions, of which you generally will have very many. Also, many opponents won't take the watchtowers at all. So if you take the watchtowers, you will have huge vision on the opponent's army. And if he comes down an attack path where you have an Hellion at Xenaga watchtower, you will have much more time to react to his attack. Rocks or rock towers on paths leading to expansions. Those provide defense in the early game, and they allow for fast movement between bases later in the game when you have an army to clear those rocks. Generally, everything that provides defense is very good. So let's talk about a couple of examples. At first I want to talk about Dust Towers, which is in my opinion the best mech map ever created. It has most of the features I discussed earlier. And as the most prominent one, it only has one attack path. This one. The opponent spawns here, he has to attack at this path we spawn here. Also, most of the paths on this map are really narrow. For example, these both here, the mid, and these paths. Which means that we can defend this area pretty easily, and as such we have 4 bases relatively safe. These 4. And with 4 bases, Mech can already do some great things. I also talked about short paths between bases. We see to the natural and to the third, we have very, very small, short paths. And the fourth base is directly below the third. The way to the fifth base is a little bit longer, but this isn't too long, and this is generally also okay. And if we have the fifth base, the path to the sixth and seventh base is also pretty short. The only base that is a little bit further away is the gold base. But at the point where we want the gold base, which is the eighth base on the map, we will have enough army to cover all of the ground. So I also talked about small bases. The main base is medium-sized to small, and it doesn't provide much space for drops, but still a little bit. The natural, however, is very small, and the only place the opponent really can drop is this small area. The other bases are a little bit bigger, but they aren't as important because there is the production facilities are only in the main, or mostly in the main. Then Yeah, we come to the minor features. High ground expansions. The third base is a high ground expansion. The opponent only can attack at this ramp. The fifth base is a high ground expansion. There are these two ramps where the opponents can come from. And the seventh base is a high ground expansion. The opponent can only come from these two ramps. And on all those bases, if you put a couple of tanks above those ramps, you will generally be very safe. So Dust Towers also features an in-base natural. This means that this small ramp, which you can close with 3 buildings, defends 2 bases, and as such the natural is nearly for free. Then to the rocks leading to expansions. Dust Towers has 2 of those per player, of course. This rock is pretty good because when you take the 7th base, you can put a couple of tanks above those rocks and it becomes nearly impossible for the opponent to break these rocks. And if you want to defend with your army from the mid to this expansion, you can just break down those rocks yourself and you're there pretty fast. The rocks to the gold base, however, are not as good because they block the workers from coming there. But generally, if you want to take the gold base, you will have enough army to break down those rocks. Now to the space between your own and the opponent's bases. All of your bases are in this area. And all of your opponent's bases are in this area. We see that there's a very long path between those areas and a very short path at this point. But these points aren't as important because there's no ground between those bases, and as such, the opponent's ground army can only attack at this path, and yeah, as such, there is a very long way between his bases and your bases, and this makes splitting the map very easy, especially because this attack path is extremely narrow and you can put a couple of siege tanks or general defense at this point and all your bases are safe from ground attacks. There are no Xanaga watchtowers on Dust Towers. The map would be even better for Mech if there were watchtowers at these 2 points, because then you could just put 1 unit there and can see all of the attacks very early. So yeah, we can see Dust Towers is an extremely good map because most of the paths are very narrow and there are very few attack paths. And as such, you have a couple of bases for free. These 4 in the early game, and these 4 as soon as you take the mid. So yeah, it's really easy to split this map, and as I already said, in split map scenarios, Mech will always win. So now to the other extreme, the probably worst map for Mech. This is Desert Oasis, an extremely early Wings of Liberty map. It got removed pretty fast from the ladder due to being really bad, but for a short time people actually played ladder on this map. So the first thing I talk about is the main bases are huge. They can be dropped from everywhere, so it's extremely hard to defend against drops on this map, especially because the airspace is between those bases is extremely short. Then the bases are also really far away from each other. Already the natural is farther away from the main base than the fourth base on Dust Towers. And even getting a third, it won't happen because you can either take this third, which is extremely far away and extremely open, or you can take this third, but then you have to break the rocks at first and you won't have enough units to do that. So yeah, very far away from each other, the bases. Then narrow path. You won't find many here. You only have this small choke point and this ramp. And all other of these paths are extremely wide. Yeah, few attack paths. There are already two major attack paths. This one and this one. And all the bases are on either one of these paths, so you will always have to worry about an attack from another side. So this is really bad. And yeah, generally you have extremely open spaces like here or here or here, and more than one attack path. So yeah, it's extremely hard to play, or it would be extremely hard to play Mech on this map, but thankfully no maps like this are on the ladder pool. But I wanted to show you the extreme, how could a map be extremely worse, bad again for Mech. At last I want to talk about maps that aren't as extreme. Most maps won't have a feature everywhere on it. For example, on New Gettysburg, we have one extremely narrow attack path, but we also have open fields in these areas. And we have a couple of more narrow paths and a couple of wide paths. So this is a mixture of narrow and open paths. So if you want to look if a map is good for Mech, you have to look at a feature and then where is this feature on this map, and is the point where this map, where this feature is important for the map. For example, this narrow attack path is extremely narrow and important in the early game. And as such, you can defend early attacks pretty well. But later attacks will use this attack path because it is way too easy for a Mech player to defend the lower attack path. So this means that this lower path is only important in the early game, and in the early game it is really good. These open fields are only important later in the game when you want to take, for example, this map, this base or this base. And as such, at that point, you will already have enough army to defend this open field. And as such, it isn't as important that there are not that those paths are not as narrow. And yeah, if you look at this map, you can see these two main attack paths, which in itself would not be really good, but due to the upper path being very long, it isn't important in the early game, and due to the lower path being very narrow, it isn't important past the early game. And so in each stage of the game, there will only be one main attack path. In the early game, it's this lower path, and in the mid and late game, it is this upper path. And so, even though there are more than one main attack path, it isn't as important because they get unusable after certain periods of time. And so, yeah, New Gettysburg is actually a pretty good map mech. The other way around, the mech map. Yeah, also, the base is pretty small. So, the opponents can only drop from here or here. And it is generally pretty easy to defend drops on this map. The other features I talked about were high ground expansions, for example. New Gettysburg has a couple of those. The third base is a high ground expansion, and the fifth base is to this point in a high ground expansion. But it can be attacked from high ground from here, so it is kind of a point between a low ground and a high ground expansion. And this base, and of course the gold base, are high ground expansions that are pretty easy to defend. But there are also low ground expansions that you should consider getting anyways, because this base especially is pretty close to your natural and to your third base, and so it becomes pretty easy to defend. There's also this island expansion that you can take pretty early, because if you put a couple of turrets on this island, you can defend it pretty easily from all drops or air attacks or something. And yeah, this Senaga watchtower is pretty important because it provides vision around at this area, and so you can control all of the attack paths later in the game with this one watchtower. So yeah, what I wanted to show you with New Gettysburg is a map can have the discussed features on certain parts, and it can have the opposites of these features on other paths, and you have to value how important are those places where the paths are narrow, where you have close expansions, where there's only one attack path. And yeah, if the advantages overweigh the disadvantages, it generally is a good mech map. And if the disadvantages are more important, it generally isn't as good a mech map. So to wrap this all up, there are a couple of features that are good for mech play, and you always want to veto the maps that aren't good for mech, or in other words, don't have these features, and you want to play on the maps that have these features. So thank you all again for the support. It's really appreciated, and until next time.